jazz guy who, the cafe lead, the jazz guy, he's a Emmy-winning musician and stuff, so they're doing and he died last. So they're doing like a New Orleans, second line, starting at the Trust. Coming across the park. That's where Jen, that's why she's not a great singer.
First item is approval of the September minutes. We did have one change that stood out.
That was incorporated in, because we have it in the
So,
file package.
in the file. Okay. Anybody have any additional comments, questions, concerns?
Approval.
Okay, just a second. Carol, all in favor? Aye. Next, we have approval of the expenditures. We paid checks 74028 to 74020, totaling $2,783.71. October warrants checks 74031 to 74122, totaling $219,901.17. Do you have any questions?
There's a couple of these expenditures for the elevator, the Plank LLC.
Yeah, Blank is the general contractor for the elevator.
And the, HP Inc.
That is a periodic, every couple of years, we do a pretty major refresh of our computers, and we're at a state now, and Don may have something more to say about it, where a lot of our computers were aging out, where Sal's and JA would no longer support them, because there's a whole new version of the Microsoft suite that is being retired. So a lot of that needs to be replaced.
Besides updating that.
No? Would you like to make a motion to approve? Hello. Okay. There's a second.
Second.
Frank, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, next we have approval of the financial reports, prepaid list and prepaid warrant summary sheets, budget report.
Question, did you, Eric, set up the on them, moving solution? Okay. Okay.
For next month.
And then would that show up at all in our reports, or would we just be there and you like report on it at the end of the year or something?
Yeah, it'll
Or
just-
budget?
It'll just be on the balance sheet.
Right, okay.
And the software and licenses, I don't remember, we talked about this before, with the,
Yeah, that's another one that goes kind of hand in hand with the replacement of all of these computers.
right,
So it may be front loaded rather than a thing that we spent for.
Anyone else? I would like to make a motion to approve. Okay, there's a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, all in favor? We have governments report. I wanted to say thank you to the friends and to all of the staff for all of the work that went into their success weekend. Thank you so much. It was really fun. And for number 6. Too soon. I want to remind everybody that on the board, you have not completed your 2 hours of continuing ed. That doesn't be done by the end of the year. And then remind everybody have not bought tickets for the 9th Jubilee on the 24th, which are still available from.
we can sexual harassment training or not?
We are expected to do it regardless of,
Okay, so.
it's not a count, it doesn't count for your continuation, but by you doing it through work, it's fine, you just send a
Yeah.
attestation form to the other.
We just, last week, and I don't know, I think Jen maybe shared invite with you, but if she hasn't, we have a recording. Just last week, we and Crandall co-sponsored, another, webinar with, Paul about intellectual freedom and how to respond and how to prepare for responses to challenges that is eligible for the CD credits. And I can make sure to share the link with all of you if you want to watch the recording. And it came with a list of like 20 things to do to prepare and to respond to that. So,
Great. That's all I have. Don't seem to be here for public comment. Seeing any email. Correspondence and communication.
and we have had a little bit of it's interesting, a little bit of a communication. The Katie was looped in on, I think maybe as a vestige from prior times about, and just to make sure that the board is all aware, we do have a system when there are nonprofit organizations that provide, even if they're not necessarily located physically within our service area, but they provide headquartered here, but they provide substantial services within our service area. So I think AIM, Captain, for example, we will register them for parking lot permits for vehicles that are owned by those organizations. And so it's come up recently that Captain has been parking here when they're doing some of their street outreach in the neighborhood. They haven't come in to register their vehicles for permits, and so they've gotten tickets. We will absolutely register the capital-owned vehicles for them and then make an appeal to the city. And the city's usually pretty good about cooperating with us if we say, can you please forgive these tickets? What we can't do and where it becomes a little trickier, and because we've gone back and forth, it's this similar question to the nanny who lives outside of the district, but the child lives within the district. There are times when people from the Red Cross, that's happened, for example, and from Captain, use their personal vehicles when they're doing business for those organizations. In those cases, we don't register those vehicles for permits because there's no way to know that that's why they're parked. So, we do also have a system that Rick is kind of in charge of, when it's coordinated with Catherine or Trevor or Jamie. If somebody from one of those organizations is presenting a program here, and they need to park here, like we have placards that we'll give them, like for the day, put this in your windshield. And again, enforcement is pretty good about paying attention to those. And when they don't, the city has been pretty forgiving. But where the kind of fudgy area is where somebody's using their personal vehicle for an organization that we partner with, but not necessarily for something that's happening inside the library. To park here to do something in the neighborhood. That's where it's unlikely that we would go to bat for them with this city, and we couldn't register them for.
So but what you just said with Captain is that you would register their vans if they're doing.
We'll register the
outreach,
ones.
that it's not necessarily in the library though?
Yes, yeah, for Captain, we would absolutely, because they've got such a presence here, and if Captain owns the vehicles, yes.
Right.
Because they're, we partner with them in lots of ways that are not necessarily just programmatic. We would do the same thing for any other nonprofit organization.
That's spending a long time here. Yeah.
Okay, we have ice report.
Okay, so good news is that the elevator project seems to be nearing completion. I guess it's very close. Today, we had discussions about the flooring, so final finishes inside the cab. They came in, they did 2 inspections. Apparently there are a total of 3 inspections that need to be done before it gets its license to elevate, I guess. One was the electrician, and it's passed with flying colors, the electrical inspection. Today, the city's building inspector came, and there are 2 things on a punch list to be completed. One was apparently in the mechanical room, they sealed some some penetrations with the wrong kind of caulk. So they had to remove that caulking and replace it with a different kind of caulking, but it might be done by now. Rick, do you know, they were gonna complete that by the end of the day. And then the other thing is, they just couldn't see it because it's behind all of these enclosures by the doors, is there needs to be a sign outside that's ADA appropriate that says this is an elevator. So the signage. Those were the last two things from the city's inspection. And then tomorrow we get the inspection, which is probably the more difficult one, the more stringent one really is from the elevator company itself to come in and that's the one that you want to be tough, right? To make sure that it's, that, you know, that it's stopped within the appropriate number of millimeters of the landing and that everything is working exactly as it should be. And that is scheduled for tomorrow, so it could be by Friday, or maybe even the end of the day tomorrow, they might start taking down those barriers. Yeah, so it could be and it would be very shortly after that the elevator would be operational. It could be actually.
And so are there elevator rides at the party
There could be, there could be.
in costume?
Yeah, we talked about if you know anybody who has an elevator operator costume. The mechanical systems, we have a little bit less good news. It's hard to say. We're still in these discussions with, it seems like with these two events that happened kind of back to back in July, we more or less, did the overhead door get completed today, Rick? All of them were done?
Yes, the overhead door got completed. Part of the elevator pieces, there, because of some sensor changes, they have to test 10% of all the alarms. So that's what we'll do from 6 to 9 tomorrow morning, but well, we might see that elevator door come down.
Oh, the overhead.
Yes,
So the fire doors that come down on the first floor and on the ground floor, when the alarm gets triggered, the doors come down, and you probably noticed that there's one right next to the information desk that came down back in July and has been down ever since because it's been broken as a result of whatever that's like the last thing that's been broken from that first power outage event. From the second, there are still two pretty major HVAC units that we're still having these discussions with the insurance company about repair versus replace.
What is I don't understand. What do they don't want to replace it, it's more money?
Yes, yeah, it's essentially that is that's
And you're
the,
thinking,
and
we
we
think
think
here
it
it should be replaced?
we think it probably should be, because you don't know what's going on in all of the electrical, all of the boards, if there's
Right.
stuff in there, like what kind of contamination and interference is gonna be with all of the connections that have to happen.
Do we have so who's like, are you just, not you just, Ike,
Right, right.
because you're Ike, but are you the only, like, is there a lawyer involved? Do we have an attorney?
At this point, not yet. We're still working with, we're kind of between the insurance company and our insurance broker.
Okay,
And our insurance broker, which is AmSure, seems to be on our side.
okay,
And at this point is still willing to go to bat with us, with the company that, they wrote the policy for us from. And so they're still on our side at
okay.
this point with that, but it takes a while to get resolution on these things.
Oh, yeah.
Like there was an insurance claim payment listed in the income report?
Yes.
Is that part of this?
That was part of, so we haven't gotten any payment because we haven't reached any conclusion yet for the second incident. But for the first one, yes, where the door was damaged and and the generator was damaged, and there were a few other things that were covered under that first one.
Do you know if it goes to, if it's not resolvable, does it go to arbitration?
That I don't know, and the tricky, and we just haven't gotten there yet
Right, right.
to know what the final resolution. And the tricky part of that is that the person that we would probably make an appeal is is the insurance company. It's like under normal circumstances, we would go to, I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
So Saratoga Reads, I think today, Catherine, are we ready to say, we've decided on a junior companion, so the voting is in, it was very close, it actually was, in the end, was a tie that was broken by a poll that we took from internally from staff who hadn't voted in the first round, so the Saratoga Reads, selection 2026 will be The Soul of an Octopus by Cy Montgomery. If you haven't read it, it's kind of a delightful book to read. And the junior companion is going to be Pack by Sarah Pennypacker, which is a book about a relationship between a boy and a fox. So they're both kind of animal stories. One's a true story and one is a novel for young readers that are both about.
So obnoxious.
What's that?
Who was, is it safe?
Oh, yeah, so the other, the runner-up was, Braiding Sweetgrass.
Oh, okay.
The choices.
It was very interesting because in the online voting, there was a clear, which was neither one of the ultimate two that tied. But when we counted the in-person votes, then the clear winner dropped down to third. And the third place one was the Valiant Ambition, the book about Benedict. Very interesting. And book festival, yes, it was great to see all of you, many of you, in all of these places all around the town. There was a lot going on, right? And I think my favorite part of the festival, it's hard to say, there were so many good parts, but did anybody else go see Kate DiCamillo at Maple Ave Middle School? She told this story about, they both, she and her illustrator, Sophie, I can't remember at the moment, had stories about stories about being on airplanes with their readers, like coincidentally with their readers. And some people I think it's her name, told this like very touching story about being next to a child and then turbulence came along and she asked the child, and the kid was very nervous, she asked the kid what was her favorite book, and it turned out to be Ivy and Bean, which is a book that she wrote. So they spent the rest of the flight like drawing together, and it was very touching. Camilla told the story about being on a plane with a kid who was about 10, reading Because of Winn-Dixie, which is one of her books, and she's like, should I or shouldn't I? Like, do I say something? And she said, and finally she did. She's like, I wrote that book, and the little kid said, no, you didn't.
Exactly.
And she had a whole argument with the kid about, yes, you really, she finally pulled out her ID, which says Katrine, Camilla. And the kid still said, just because you have the same last name doesn't mean you're going. And staff day was such a blast. I think everybody had a great time learning a lot about our partners in Greenfield with the Historical Society, with the people at Stewart's, with the old friends at Cabot Creek. A little bit of everything going on, but in the morning, hearing about the fire district and the town, and especially all of the amazing things that kind of a new regime they've got in the recreation department. They're doing pretty incredible. And Supervisor Beach did mention that they're building, there's community building, and that there's very serious consideration for having a library presence in Any questions about anything else? it was a very, very busy. What? Since we left. The other thing that might be a source of confusion, that might actually be a different, could have been a whole different thing on the agenda, was, since we started talking, it's been a while ago, and, about, upcoming capital projects, particularly what we do with, the Saratoga room and the archival collection. We have to preserve that treasure, which is the only thing that we're really the library of record for. And where to put it so that it's protected from the elements, from the lights in a climate controlled area. And that it's also protected from our fire suppression system, which we had talked about moving it down to the lower level, which may be where it winds up still. We were trying to come up with alternatives because the lower level of this building is the only part of the building in which we've ever had a flood. And it's also the only part of the building in which the fire suppression system is sprinkled. And so it may not be, so while in some ways it's an ideal place for an archival collection, in other places not. So we had kind of been looking around, and we were excited about the notion of on the first floor, there might have been a way to enclose some of the space where the DVDs and music and things that are maybe an ephemeral part of the collection now, since people are streaming more and there might be an alternative use of that space. And so we had daydreams of maybe walling that in and putting this very special part of our collection front and center on the first floor in a place that's like the only internal part of the building. And what you'll see and what we got back from the architects is there are some code things that would prevent us from enclosing that entire space in.
So I was wondering, so it would
Yeah.
mean that there's two different areas?
Exactly. It's kind of what we had dreamed up was closing from the information desk all the way back to this office space for technical services now, pulling all of that in. What we learned from talking to the architects is that there's this door, which is right across the hall from the door here, which this egress needs to be maintained it's actually right across from the cafe space. So that is that needs to be maintained. So what they came up with as a very first out of the gate, and this was kind of a pioneer, was dividing the into two. With an office space in the back, collection space in the front. But it turns out to be, if we do that, we lose a lot of square footage.
Right.
Even if we're looking at compressed shelving, it's maybe not as ideal as we originally.
And what about using the bottom right corner with what you have? That and then to the right,
Over here, so this
yeah,
over here, this is where the magazines are, the new and popular area. And this is all kind of floor to ceiling windows right here.
wow,
This is kind of the most beautiful corner of the library, in my estimate.
okay.
So we're not giving up hope yet, but this is what's like and we also met with them last week or the week before and said, can you give us some idea of what this might look like? And so we can come to you with an initial. And if you go to the next page, we'll see what they've done just to give us a notion of what we're dealing with space wise. They've taken the current footprint of the Saratoga room upstairs and just laid it over the first floor so you can get a sense of what.
How big is it?
Of how big it is, right?
Yeah,
And could the egress have a door on the other side of the Saratoga room so that the egress still existed?
It
But
could
you go
possibly,
through the Saratoga room to get through it?
yeah, we didn't ask that, but that could be because the door that's here is closed.
Right,
So if it could still be a door way without leaving it. And
right,
I think maybe they just sent that to say, like, here's a quick and dirty thing that we laid it over and this is what we do. And I don't know that they are aware of how willing we are to forego like the open shelves that we have upstairs in favor of more collapsible compressed shelving, because we think that's probably the way of the future, since that is theoretically the only part of the collection that is perpetually going to grow. Everything else we could, we could read to get rid of, but because that's part of the collection that doesn't really get weeded. It only gets bigger, it never gets smaller. It doesn't grow quickly, but it does.
How many people do you think use the Saratoga room?
We have some statistics right now. I think the traffic is pretty low, so that is a consideration, like, so it's in a way, it kind of reminds me of the discussions we were having about if we were to locate a branch somewhere, do we locate it where all the traffic is, or where all the population is, or do we locate it in a remoter part? Like, what we think would happen, since it is kind of a treasure that is probably underutilized now, if we were to put it front and center and highlight it, then it probably would get more use than it does now. But right now, the stuff that's there definitely gets more traffic than the Saratoga. But like I say, the formats that are there, the disc media is really probably the next thing to go when we're thinking about getting rid of formats or changing formats for making collection. So at this point, it's a lot of food for thought, but we wanted to get it in there to let you know that we're still thinking about it. It hasn't, and especially since with that collection, since we don't know what's gonna happen with funding models, given the state of the world, this does seem like a collection and a project that beyond, federal funding options for grant options, there's probably a lot of local interest in the preservation of this collection, and so there might be maybe some more local philanthropy that can be sought out to help us to preserve that collection that doesn't rely on any kind of governmental funding or less governmental funding.
And does that space right now have any special, like temperature control or anything?
It does, yeah, I mean, the whole building, when they're not broken, is on a building, maintenance system for temperature control. And so if you go in there, you will notice a marked difference in the temperature. If you're ever hot anywhere else, just hop in there and you'll cool off.
Okay.
So what it doesn't have is the light control. It's got these big, beautiful window areas, which are really detrimental to the collection.
Make them fade away.
Yeah, facing west.
Yeah. And, an advantage of doing it down here is that also, staffing is pretty slim up there, so permanently there's one full-time librarian and their part-time clerk who are kind of the, other librarians from the adult services department do shifts in there. But having it on the first floor closer to the information desk could, would also integrate it more maybe into the adult services department. And it would give an opportunity for the other librarians in that department to kind of expand their skill set and for Jamie not to have to hunt down somebody to staff that desk on days when the one librarian there is not. Questions that would go up there? So it was a little bit disappointing to get that back, but we're not giving up yet. We're students.
That's right. Trevor.
Okay, before I add a couple of things, any questions? The report that I submitted? So I did just want to mention quickly, I had mentioned, I think last month, maybe one other time, that we were experiencing some issues with our primary print vendor, our book vendor, Baker and Taylor. Well, since that last report, Baker and Taylor has announced that they are effectively shutting their doors by the end of the year. And so this has sent shockwaves through the library world as many public libraries utilize Baker and Taylor as their primary book vendors. So the good news is we are actually not, we're not feeling those effects. We're not in a bad spot at all because I think back in 2017, Jennifer Ferris established a relationship with Ingram Library Services, which is another massive book retailer in the United States. And so as we started noticing supply issues from Baker and Taylor back in the spring, very slowly and almost kind of organically, the shift between purchasing from Baker and Taylor to Ingram occurred. And so by the time the news came out that Baker and Taylor was shutting down completely, we had pretty much already switched all of our book buying over to Ingram. So we were able to fill those orders that were going unfilled by Baker and Taylor by purchasing those items from Ingram, canceling those POs, those orders from Baker and Taylor. And so essentially we kind of made the shift as other libraries were going like, oh no. And also other libraries were trying to find other vendors, you know, like going to Ingram, and Ingram was being swamped with requests. And as of for the last, 2 weeks, Ingram has been absolutely swamped with requests. But since we're already in the club, we're already good. But because we don't really want to have all of our purchasing eggs in one basket, I'm having meetings and have had meetings with Barnes and Noble Library Services. Amazon is getting into the library services game. Follett Books, which primarily deals with schools, they're now working with public libraries to sell kids and teen titles to public libraries. So that's another one. And then Brodart, which is kind of more like a Baker and Taylor, almost like a Baker and Taylor clone, a little bit smaller, but Brodart, which provides full library services, including the data that we require, the processing that we require. I have a meeting with them next Wednesday, to see if we can work something out. But if we can have additional options, and some of those additional options might not necessarily be, you know, we're gonna start buying all our stuff from this one person. We may find that there are certain instances where it behooves us to order from, say, Barnes and Noble, like if we're having a special event and we're looking for something that maybe Ingram can't provide in a timely manner, but it might be on the shelf at Barnes and Noble. Because we'd be library customers, we can actually go to a brick and mortar store and just put the PO number and walk out with the product and get it billed later. So these are those things that as we decide who we're gonna sign on with, it might work for certain situations, but it looks like Ingram's gonna be our primary going forward. So the good news is, after all that, like, yeah, we're in a good spot. We're not scrambling like the rest of the library world. You know, I'm really happy. Jen had some great foresight, also had the philosophy, let's not put everything in one business. And you think, you know, Baker and Taylor, we thought they were too big to fail. And, you know, unfortunately, we're seeing it in many areas. So.
You might also see it at your local bookseller too, actually, because they were the big supplier for the trade.
Based on the warrants, the sheets, the checks, the overwhelmingly the money's going to.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at those, you know.
It's better.
That's it. Yeah, Baker Taylor used to see those $8,000, $9,000 checks, and now Ingram, you're seeing 6, 7, 8. So.
Is Baker Taylor a regional supplier?
No, it's a national supplier. And, you know, like a lot of companies, a number of years, they've changed hands over time, and then the last outfit to buy them was a venture capital firm. And then they had a plan. I mean, they made an announcement that they had a buyer.
ReaderLink.
Yeah, ReaderLink.
And ReaderLink was gonna buy the company, but not assume the debt. And so the publishers went, hey, that's money that we're owed. That's why we stopped selling books to Baker and Taylor, because they owed us money. And, you know, it was 3 of the big 5 publishers did this. And so when that deal was announced, the publisher said, yeah, try again. And that deal fell through less than 2 weeks after it was announced.
Yeah, it was quick.
So, and then a week after that, Baker and Taylor announced that they were closing up shop. So, yeah, definitely our hearts go out to the staff at Baker and Taylor, because I think this somewhat was a huge shock to them. They ended up the day the announcement went out, they laid off over 500 employees. And severance packages were also, withheld, they were, or canceled rather. So a lot of really great people that we worked with for a lot of years are hurt because of this, so. And that's all.
Is there an issue about production of books?
No, it doesn't have anything to do luckily with the production of books. It has to do with, paying publishers for the books. And that wasn't happening.
It's for the business model.
Yes.
You know, for the VC people, it's all about the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
Not too much to add. I do sometimes want to contextualize some of the numbers for you. So I always give you my door count for the teen room. And when we reopened the teen room post-COVID, and like it was November of like 2021, I think it was like a door count of 11. So the fact that September came around, school started, and from the first day of school, the room was packed again. We had almost 300 kids this month. It's really exciting. I know sometimes it's loud. We don't always make the best neighbors, but to me, it's really, really fantastic that the kids see us as a place they want to be and they choose to spend their time with us. Even on Saturdays, we're seeing more kids, which for a while Saturdays was like, So I'm really excited that, you know, when I put those numbers up there, just so you know, like I keep track of what this really means, and it's really nice that they just go up and up and we see some positivity. Otherwise, it's mostly back to all of our wonderful schools. You know, we tend to run school year versus summer, so we're back. And yes, 3 of us were trying to deflate a unicorn, don't ask me.
I thought that was a good time.
I don't know how else you deflate a unicorn, but if you have tips, you can let me know for next year.
Any other questions for Heather?
Just in addition to my very short report this month, since we were talking about the Saratoga room, we did have a donation from 2 patrons who were utilizing Saratoga room. They were doing multi-week history research on, I think it was Jewish communities in Saratoga Springs, and they were so impressed with how helpful the staff was in the room that they donated, I believe it was $250 to the library. So they named Michelle and Victoria and other staff members in particular, saying, you know, they answered so many questions. They stopped whatever they were doing to help them out. They recommended extra resources for them to take a look at. They were just super. So I wanted to make sure that they.
And that came after the 1st of October, so you see it on next month's income.
Yeah.
Been crazy. I'll love it when there's no contractors in the building for a week. This morning we started at 6 a.m. and it just kept going, like Ike said. You just jumped floor to floor, just making people happy and, okay, what do we need to do next? And tomorrow morning we start with the alarms, the state inspector, who we have to keep happy. They have to put all the weights in the elevator to test, you know, all those metrics. And then once we get that approval, those walls start coming down, then we can start repairing the walls they screwed the other walls into, and we get some painting and some flooring, and knock on wood. A lot of people will be happy once they get to push the button. Any questions or comments?
Who do we use for the spoilers? Who services those?
We use, usually that's done by our insurance company, and that's subbed out to FM Boiler. They come in, usually it's near the end of November. In fact, I got solicitation and they tried to run it as a phone scam. They wanted to come in and inspect them and do this. I go, I'm headed to the dentist, you know, can you send me an email? No email, I got another call and it sounded like a phone boiler room, you know, in the distance. And I started asking some questions. I said, well, if that's true and that you do our inspections, then, you should be able to send me an email. It should be on file. 15 minutes later, they call back, can you send me your email address? Nope. So I had already called our inspector and he goes, you have your certificate from, it's still good, right? And I go, yeah, till the end of November. And he goes, in days long gone by, they might have used you to boiler, but, you know, not anymore. So it was a scam. And if we had done it through them, you would have had to pay them, but it wouldn't have worked with your insurance company. Not certified through your insurance. Yeah, they're very creative and they have enough information because you're in the state register. I had my cell phone number, you know, they had a lot of information in there. It seemed that. So trust your gut.
Anybody have other questions?
That's all right.
Okay. Sorry. I think in the report you mentioned the two HVAC. Or
Yes.
more than two?
No, we had two major ones that were damaged, one in the basement, but the big one is way up in the tower on the Henry Street side. And the quote was about 84 grand, and that's why the insurance company is fighting to try to part it out, but there are a lot of bad pieces that go, it's a poke and hope scenario.
And there is a third one that requires attention unrelated to these.
Yeah, we had another one we had quoted before that, had two semi-major repairs and failed again. But we had already had that quoted before all these electrical incidents. But that big one up there, the bad part is, once the motor was on fire and those smoke dampers closed, it forced all that particulate and all that stuff backwards inside the unit. And they're not airtight. They will suck air in from that area. And all it takes is once you start up, some vibration or some strong air movement, and that little piece of carbon could go between two solder plates. And there goes the motherboard of another 3 or 4 months, or yeah, there's a lot of issues. But I can only explain my reasoning. I did this for PEF. We had some phasing, and back in about 25 years ago, there was over $300,000 worth of damage then. And, you know, but that was my experience. So when you learn the hard way, you try to do it the right way, because labor costs are massive. The cost for that unit is complicated by the fact that it needs a crane to both be removed and put up on the roof. So that complicates the matter.
I just have one more question, please. Those two dates when the electric zapped out,
Right.
did they both go on the same dates or?
So that was the second incident on 7/11, and they both went on that day. Yeah,
But you resolved the July 5th incident.
yeah, the first incident was much easier to deal with, smaller portions and easy to, you know, connect the dots and all that.
And the second one was a bigger, because there was actual fire on the
Yeah.
first day. The alarms went off and stuff, but there wasn't the smoke, but there was actual, the motors were on fire and there was soot and acrid smoke from the building.
Even in the basement, you didn't want to be in there, the 8 grid all the electrical wiring burned, and we had a hard time evacuating all the smoke and odor out of the building, because you have to force it out, because everything wants to go up.
I never, other things that can welcome in.
There was a whole number
Right.
places.
Downtown. That's
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a fire on the roof down here, the city generator didn't start.
But also like random parts of the building, it didn't just
Right.
take all the power, that's what made it really confusing, it was like all of a sudden, certain things weren't working.
Yeah, it was very.
Yeah, it was very odd.
strange.
Well, you know, if you look at electrical, there was so many brownouts on the 7-4 or 7-5 day. You can continually get all these brownouts, and that's hurting your electronics.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden power goes out and comes on, and it's either working or not. We had another small piece that went out about 45, almost 50 days after the second incident. But it's hard to relate it, you know, because it's past that that 30-day period.
Yeah.
So trying to say, oh, this caused that too. How do you prevent? 7 years old, they don't. You know, that age, all of that is part of that scenario when it comes to that. But electronics are just really sensitive.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I was remembering that when we were preparing for the elevator, that, we moved some stuff because we were worried about access to the other stories. And I'm just wondering, like, do you think we're gonna try and restore the way it was before? Do you like it the way we resolved it? Feels like we're kind of in flux right now, and I just was wondering.
I think that's a good question, and actually, one of the people who might have the most insight into that just left the building.
Sorry.
No, that's right, no, that's right, I mean, I think that is a great question, and something that we'll have to sit down and have a contact, I think especially between Trevor's department and Jamie's department about what's working on the first floor, do we wanna keep things
Did we
there?
like it?
Yeah, it is a little cramped. Now we move so much stuff, but I think people are liking the access to, you know, some of the things that Don moved down to the first floor. Like the remote printing, I think it only makes sense maybe to leave it on the first floor, to pop in and do that. I don't know, and then in terms of, like, beyond that, I think the likelihood of the friends going back into the coffee shop is small. I think it's less likely to happen than it is to happen, that they'll be able to resume that obligation. And so that might leave that space to play with, you know, for something else going forward. But I think some of the collection changes, I know that, Catherine, you can, if I'm speaking out of turn, I know we did some rearranging of the teen collection that they love.
They
love it compared to the way it was arranged before. And so that might be a permanent change. Speaking of the Friends and their coffee service, they're actually netting more profit now than they were when they were operating a shop.
What do they do right now?
That's surprising.
So,
Is it just because of cost of labor? Where the station?
I think it might be because they don't have the associated expense. So they're not paying rent, they have less in personnel costs, they're buying fewer supplies because they're not doing all of the treats and things, they're spending more money at BJ's maybe than they were at that local bakery. And they're taking donations, so it's essentially coffee and a few snacks that they can buy if they don't get BJ's. And they're doing it by donation rather than funding. It's easy for somebody to have a $5 bill for a $3 suggested donation and just pop it in the box and not worry about getting change, right? Or if all you have in your, if you have cash in your pocket and all you have is a 20, you pop one in and say, oh, I'll get a couple of cups of coffee over the next week or whatever. And so it's turning out to be that they're actually netting more with that model of operation than they were. So, yes, it's still not a ton, they're not making a ton of money from it, but they are the one.
That's great.
Yeah.
Kelly, did you have anything?
I don't have a report this month, but we're still hiring for a building monitor and a cleaner. So still collecting applications with that. And the library, yes. We have the canvas, we have to do canvas for. We're waiting for the canvas to come back for.
I think we have special report. Don't see any unfinished business or any new business. Anybody have anything else?
Well, I did want to say, we usually do a trick or treat for the preschoolers on Halloween. So if anyone would like to dress up and hand stuff out, just let me know. We do it, it's like around 11 o'clock on Friday morning. So if you have some free time and you want to come see the kids, it's mostly preschoolers and they're adorable. It's the first day of the year. And we have plenty of stuff to share to give away. So anybody wants.
Take some good pictures.
Yes, plenty of fun, but if anyone has some free time and wants to come, please do.
Is there a theme of costume this year? No.
But if you're wearing your 50s garb to the
kids,
yeah.
I think the kids would get a pick up the baby's costume.
All right, well, do you have any other business? I'll go adjourn. Thank you.